All right. Welcome to another Slave Food Conversation. Hope everyone out there is doing well. We are missing our co-host in Danette Batiste, but we're going to do the best we can. How you doing, Eric?
Doing good. Looking forward to this. We've been saying we're
Yes.
going to do this for a long time, and I think the timing is perfect to do this show.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you guys out there haven't noticed, we've transitioned, we pivoted just slightly. And what Dr. Walsh and I are doing is we're really digging into some of the issues that confront us. Some of the issues we dealt with breast cancer and looking at the power of lifestyle and its role. And if you haven't checked out that episode, make sure you go into the archives, go back to our YouTube channel, go back on Facebook and check it out. But this week, we have something special for you. Something sweet, something scary that's there for you. Isn't that right?
That's right. This one is a tough one because I think I'll speak for myself and say that I was raised on sugar, and I have to admit, even though I went to church, one of my favorite holidays was Halloween, and running from house to house with pillowcases trying to get as much candy as possible, so it would last us all the way to the new year. So this one is a tough one in a way, but it's actually a very needed one.
It is. And I typically will tell patients, I say, hi, my name is Columbus. I'm Dr. Batiste. I am a recovering sugarholic. So I am indeed a sugarholic. I love sugar. And so I can't even have it because I know what I'll do. And I always tell the story. I remember, never forget that I would go to the store and buy these ice cream treats. And this is back before I became delivered in terms of health and wellness. And I would open the box in the car and I would start to eat one. But I knew if I got home and my wife saw me eating that the box was open, I had eaten one, she was going to fuss at me. So, of course, what would any sane man do?
Eat
Eat the
all of it.
entire box and throw it away, right? That's what I would do. I eat the entire box and throw it away. So I'm telling you, I am indeed delivered from some of that stuff.
That's comedy.
All right. So we're gonna dive into this and let's kind of get some of this stuff going on. And we're gonna put this up because I'm gonna tell you this: there is a scary truth about sugar that many people they don't realize, that they don't understand. And I think that's some of the stuff we want to share with you today. It's not all fun and giggles at all there.
Very true.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that when we look at this season of the year, this fall time of the year, that where the nation, America, and many other countries celebrate this concept of Halloween, of going around and getting candy and so forth, that this is one of the highest selling holidays for candy. It's right neck and neck with Easter. But when you took all the candy that's sold during Halloween week and turned it into a giant ball, like the one looming over the nation's capital to the left there, it would be as large as six Titanics and weigh 300,000 tons as it relates to the amount of candy that's sold during this Halloween week. And
And that's
that
the
is,
week. And
that's
we
the
know a
week.
lot of people who start shopping for Halloween candy early in September. So
That's
there's a
right.
lot of candy sold and bought.
And don't forget about the candy that's not sold, that's left over. People have to go and scoop up real quick. That's
Oh yeah.
discounted,
Oh yeah.
right? So that's one of the things there. And so when we look at candy and Halloween, it wasn't always like that. It wasn't something that was always just this massive amount of sugar that was there. It wasn't until the 1950s. And what's so interesting, like many things, and we speak to this inside of the Slave Food
Mhm.
Project at times, we talk about that nutrition, it's the manipulation of nutrition for profit. All right, and power. And so we look at the sales, the confectioners, they start to push their product this time of the year as a way to boost their sales, So they were very intentional in their efforts to make money by pushing the candy agenda during the Halloween period of time.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's that same time when a lot of the processed foods really rolled out after World War II. Candy was at the top of the list, obviously.
Yes. And it made sense for them to take that approach because it's ideal, right? Something you grab in your hand, the snack size, the fun pack size that's there for trick or treating. And it's affordable, right? That's what people think is that, hey, candy, I can buy candy really easily. Over the years, the popularity increase and candy has gotten cheaper, is what we've seen over
Wow.
and over. And as a matter of fact, New York Times brought this out several years ago that Milky Way, Snickers, and Three Musketeer bars were 59 cents a pound in 1964, or in today's dollars, that would equal about $4.53. This is compared to what you can buy the same candies at Walmart for less than $3. So we've seen gas go up to over $6 in California, $6.50. What was gas price in 1964? It hasn't taken the dovetail like that at all, has it?
Not at all.
Not
And
at
I
all.
think everyone needs to recognize this also has to do with something we talk about a lot, which is how we are subsidizing certain industries in this country to make the products actually cheaper than they would actually cost without tax subsidies. And high fructose corn syrup is one of those things that can be, easily subsidized through the corn industry.
That's right. We're going to dig into that a little bit more. And so when you look at the total worldwide consumption of sugar, it was roughly about 171 million metric tons in 2019, 2020. And it was projected to increase to about 178.84 million metric tons by 2023 and 2022, 2023. And with an increase in world trade, better agriculture, technology, among other reasons, sugar is cheaper and more widely available than ever in the history of mankind.
And I think that's important for us to point out because, I don't know we have the graph, but there's a good graph that shows you the increase in sugar consumption from just like nothing in the 1800s all the way up to where it is now in the United States. But this rise in sugar, to your point, is literally a massive experiment, right? Humans are not designed to consume this kind of sugar. And so a lot of what we're seeing in terms of disease goes right back to these numbers because this was simply not the case, a couple hundred years ago.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're seeing a disproportionate amount of intake, right? So I think first we have to set a baseline. Everyone is having too much sugar.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get this straight. Everyone, it doesn't matter what your color, your creed, your height, your weight, everyone is consuming too much sugar is what's clear. But we do find studies are revealing that there's a disparity or difference between racial groups and ethnic groups. So 19 teaspoons, right? So it's 4 grams per teaspoon. Remember that equation, you guys. 4 grams per teaspoon. So when you see it written as a gram on the back of the box of a label, you realize that is 1 teaspoon. So that means that if there's 12 grams, you're having basically 3 teaspoons with whatever serving that is. And so this said that sugar intake, added sugar, 19 teaspoons in non-Hispanic blacks, 17 teaspoons non-Hispanic whites, 16 for Hispanics, 10 teaspoons for non-Hispanic Asian adults. Large amounts.
Let me point out that when I talk about this in some of our other talks, when I was working in LA County in public health, the county health department actually did a study of life expectancy. And the only group that weren't expected to live to see 70 years are African-American men. Asian women were the only group expected to live, I think it was beyond 83 or 86 years of life expectancy. This is an interesting correlation that they are also the ones who eat the least amount of sugar. So that's a pretty striking when I think about those life expectancy studies that were done.
That's a good point. That's a great point. You're absolutely right with that. And so we talk about this plentiful amount of sugar that's here, but sugar didn't always have this history. There's actually a dark side to this whole thing of sugar. And there really is. That kind of goes back years. And, Eric, why don't you take this next series of slides?
So, I mean, when you look at sugar, there's no way sugar could be as plentiful as it is in the world today without it being processed, rapidly grown initially on plantations and then processed. So if you go and get sugar cane and you chew on the sugar cane, you get just a little bit of it at a time. But so they had to bring slaves over and they tried to use Native Americans and others to do this and it didn't work. Ultimately, they found that African slaves would work best. Columbus brought sugar to Hispaniola in 1493. Remember that Haiti was the most lucrative colony in all of the time of colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. It was more lucrative than all of the British colonies in America. So all of the 13 colonies didn't make as much money as Haiti did because of all the sugar it produced. When this happened, it went to Europe and sugar became like on huge demand. And they had to
Yes.
ramp up because, again, you can't get sugar easily in nature. The only place sugar is pure in nature is in honey and is guarded by bees. Everywhere else,
That's
it's
right.
tied to fiber. You would have to extract it. And this was sugarcane became the way that they did that.
Absolutely. And turn that white gold, like what you're saying. That's what it was called. That white gold drove trade in goods and people and fueled wealth of European nations. I think that's the key thing that you just brought out is the fact that prior to this time, sugar was a rare commodity. I was reading that some of the elite royalty would actually make statues of sugar because it was so rare as a representation of their wealth.
Their wealth,
That
yeah.
only the rich and famous, one of the main reasons why some have suggested that you don't see some of the royalties smiling is because their teeth were so heavily decayed by ingesting the sugar in part and parcel of what they were having during this time. So we saw this, and this basically fueled this slave trade that occurred.
Mm.
This is one of the most tragic and really the saddest parts of this whole story is really the impact on the enslaved people of African descent. And the historian David Eltis, co-editor of the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, he said at least 70% of the 12 million or so captives who left Africa for the Americas on slave ships were destined for slave colonies. This is how
Yeah.
important the issue of sugar production was.
So one of the things we try to do in the Slave Food Project is tie together history and its inequities with
Yes.
modern day nutritional issues. And here you is one of those places where it dovetails perfectly. Literally, we would not have the sugar problem in the world we have today if we didn't have slavery, and we wouldn't have had. And the reason we had to have slavery was because this sugar addiction flushed over Europe. Particularly the British really got into it deep, as we just said. So I make that connection because when we eat sugar today, in many ways, it's in homage back to the fact that sugar would never be as popular as it is if African slaves were not used to harvest it then.
Yeah. I think we would be remiss if we failed to mention how backbreaking work this was,
Sure.
how devastating it was, and the amount of death and toil that was sustained as a result of it. And this is what really required this massive influx. And it was irrespective, sometimes working up to 18 hours a day in order to kind of develop this crop that required so much attention to have it inside of a usable form.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the dark history. But then we start looking at the experiment. So what happened? Just like you have these scary movies around the time they were shown during Halloween, and they do all this Frankenstein business and making
Dracula.
Franken foods, right? Is what we see happen. I think one of the greatest experiments that has rendered itself devastation inside of society is high fructose corn syrup. And so what this fine tuning of high fructose corn syrup, this manufacturing occurred during a period in US history when sugar was becoming more expensive, in part due to trade restrictions, and corn was cheaper. Farm subsidies encouraging farmers to produce as much corn as possible resulted in excess supply and thus falling prices. So the manufacturers stood to save money by switching to corn-based ingredients. And so 1980, Coca-Cola began using high fructose corn syrup in its beverages. And by the 1980s, most other soft drink companies had followed suit.
And this happened with devastating consequences. It made it so much cheaper to hide sugar. And of course, initially, a lot of people didn't even know what high fructose corn syrup was. They didn't know it was sugar. So people, even if they did read the packages, they were consuming a lot of sugar. And I want to go again and say farm subsidies encourage farmers to produce. So this is one of those ironies where our tax dollars actually help produce a product that would later cause disease and death.
Yes. So what's one of the main areas of what they hid this, right? So we all have a taste for sugar. There's a reason why we're prone towards sugary foods and sweet foods is that we know that it's ripe. We know that it's something that we can eat as far as found out inside of nature. But the issue comes as well as this added sugar, but also hidden sugars. They're hidden inside of foods. And so, it's one of the reasons you start looking at why is sugar used in processed foods? Why do they have to use it in processed foods?
Yeah, and in the case of like ketchup, which most of us grew up loving ketchup. I still like ketchup, but I have found sugar-free natural. I wish I had the bottle down here. It's amazing, with full of antioxidants. Nobody else likes it, but I've developed a taste for it. It's really good, healthy ketchup because there's no sugar in it. But sugar is one of the main sugar in the ketchup is one of the reasons why kids love ketchup so much.
Yes.
It's sweet, actually.
Yes. Absolutely. And so they talk about, is it flavor balance, like what you're talking about, small amounts of sugar added to nutritious
Yep.
foods. It gives it this flavor, sort of a taste that people get used to balance out the sour and the bitter.
And you would not need the sugar if you ate the food and never tasted the sugar. By adding
Absolutely.
the sugar, they change your palate, and I think that's something that we have to look at.
Absolutely. Preservation, right? So whether or not it's used to kind of keep things on the shelf, and you always make a great comment about bacteria and their the reasons why they don't aren't attracted to certain processed
They
foods.
don't like they don't see no nutrients in it. And so here's the interesting. So you add we talk about salt, sugar, and fat. The salt and the sugar work as preservatives, which increase shelf life, which means that these products can be sold over a longer period of time, making them far more profitable to whoever is manufacturing them. So it's not just that they put the sugar in the food for taste balancing. They want to preserve it so it sits on the shelf like a Twinkie can sit on the shelf for a year, and you go back and it looks almost the same because there's the sugar and the other. There's true preservatives in it, of course, as well. Sugar being one of them. So sugar is doing you a disservice by not letting food spoil in a sense, because
Yes.
there's no nutrients, but it'll sit there forever.
That's right. That's right. Texture and mouthfeel. Texture and mouthfeel. And this is one of the key things, right? It lowers the freezing point of ice cream, right? Preventing the
Mm.
formation of the large crystals. So, back when you eat that stuff and you don't like freezer burned ice cream, or and certain products that are there. And this is what added sugar does in order to kind of
Mm.
change that. We also look at volume. This is one of the key things, right? So as you develop this taste for pastries and desserts, this is also connected with the eyes and with your
Wow.
mind and memory. And so you're used to seeing a certain appearance of the cakes and cookies and pies and that fluff and that appearance that's there. Well, sugar adds to this. It gives it that airy texture, and it helps not only it acts as food for that yeast that helps the bread products and so forth to give that rise to it. Color.
Yes.
Color.
You
This
talk
is
about this one a lot. Take this one.
Yeah, it's
Caramelize
something
it.
it's something called, we all have, I used to watch my mom cook, and I know about making that brown. You got to brown that gravy, that flour that's here, that browning, get that toast browned. You want a certain thing, that lemon meringue, you want a certain browning on top of it.
Mm.
And so when these things start to happen, this browning, which effect called the Maillard reaction, is what begins to happen. The
Mm.
same thing transpires inside of your cells, inside
Yep.
your vessels. And so when you have the browning effect, which is propagated by something called advanced glycation in products, which is this interaction between your proteins and the sugars, it leads to disease. So this is essentially the caramelization of sugar, this Maillard reaction. And this leads to this whole process that's there. And so this is one of the things that sugar adds, is that color, that richness that you're used to seeing in the appearance there.
Mm.
Taste, it goes without saying, right? You start adding that sugar and you go from not having sugar to having sugar. There's a huge transformation that begins to happen, right? And I think that this is so important. I mean, and it's not so much taste, but we'll get back to this, really about infants and the use of sugar and the pacifiers, just even to perform circumcisions as a sort of pain relieving effort that's there. And so people use it for taste. They use it obviously as an antidepressant and chemicals too as well. This is important. This tells a lot. We've all seen aisles in the grocery store that look like this. We've seen these massive locations. And so University of North Carolina, they conducted a detailed survey of the packaged foods and drinks that are purchased in American grocery stores. They found 60%, 60, of them included some form of added sugar.
Mm.
And when they looked at every individual processed food in the store, 68% had added sugar, right? So we're seeing that these
Mm.
processed foods has nearly 2/3 or more of added sugar inside of it. And some of these things are not so obvious. This is the part that's really disheartening. You think, okay, well, I get it, candy bars and cookies and cakes and crackers, you get it,
But
but
you're not
what?
thinking soup.
Nah, soup,
You're not thinking meat.
tomato sauce, right? None
Yeah.
of those things that you're starting to think about that are just everyday breads that you're thinking
Bread.
of regular every single day daily intake.
When Subway sandwich shops went to Ireland, the government actually questioned them and said they can't call the bread, they have to call it cake. There was that much sugar in the
Wow.
bread. So you do have to read the bread as well, because obviously, for all the reasons we just mentioned, it'll preserve it, it'll fluff it, and it'll make it
Yes.
taste better. And as you're going to see, it'll actually make you want to keep eating that bread. So they'll put it in all of that stuff.
And the taste is masked in part by the salt too as well, so you don't really taste it quite the same. The question is, where's all that sugar hiding?
There's so many names for it, and
Yes.
one of the things that people think is that if I eat raw sugar, or if I eat maple syrup, or if I eat, lactose, somehow they're healthier than the other ones. But sucrose is the basic sugar that we see as table sugar. It's a 1 part fructose, 1 part glucose. When you look at all of these things on here, basically they're all going to kind of mix that way. They're going to have different, plain glucose is going to be plain glucose. And it's going to be a little different than if you have just straight fructose, which honey is a bit more fructose. But you got to understand that all of these things are going to come into your system. Glucose is needed for life. It is essential to life. Ironically, it's the fructose that is probably most dangerous. And so they go hand in hand. And when we talk about high blood sugar, it is actually glucose that's not getting into your cells. Fructose does, as we'll see, go to the liver and cause major problems. And so they're hiding this stuff in there, and all of it is going to come back to haunt you, because it all ultimately is the same.
Yes. That's one of the things I oftentimes will tell patients when I'm doing lectures, is the fact that, you have to think of sugar, all these different forms of sugar, just like if aliens were coming down and looking for human beings. And they will say, I'm just looking for human beings. Well, we're all human beings. We may be different colors, everything else like that, but they're snatching all of us up, the invaders that are there. And so when they're looking for sugar, if it has os on the end of it, it's sugar. It's sugar. And so there's so many different forms, like what Eric just mentioned. And so this is what these companies have done, is they've hidden the sugars. They've created this dramatic experiment, and now they're baiting the trap to see how they can get you to get more of this stuff that's out there. And so different approaches to it.
Yeah. So when I found these, I think you found separately, we both found these ads. I thought this was hysterical. I mean, literally, they used to advertise sugar as a way to beat your appetite, to decrease appetite, to improve willpower. The science is clear now. A polar opposite is true. One thing we talk about on the Slave Food Project is one of the ways that they get you is that they often will try and make, like they did tobacco, they'll try and make it seem like it's medicinal, right? Milk, it does a body good. Here's sugar, will give you willpower. They try and make it look like this is actually a health food. But in fact, everyone now, I think, knows sugar is not a health food at all. But that's one of the ways that they helped convince Americans coming out of the World War II into the Cold War era. America was enjoying life. We were living better than everybody else in the world. Hey, you got to eat some sugar. Hey, you got to do these other things. And it got us all hooked. And so that consumption of sugar just keeps climbing.
Yeah. It's crazy. You just have to put it out there. If you just make the statement, it all of a sudden becomes true. And we see this still today, but this happened back years ago. And what's the result of this advertisement that's out there? Well, it's targeting more Black and brown kids, first and foremost. 86% of TV advertising on programs targeted to African Americans, and 82% of programs targeted to Hispanics were focused on junk food, sugary drinks, and other high sugar snacks and candies.
So we talk, we talk about how we get addicted. The orange balls there you see between, I won't get too deep into it, but it's the top would be like the presynaptic nerve ending, and then the bottom is the postsynaptic nerve ending. And what that means is this is the way that the nerves send signals one to the other to tell you how you feel and how, give you a feeling of change of mood. And so you see food naturally does this on the left. But when you do cocaine, look at all of those orange balls. That's why people get high. Dopamine is not only a motivating, it doesn't just give pleasure, it creates motivation. So you're motivated to get food because it gives you pleasure. But cocaine obviously is a whole lot more. What I want to show you is what food you eat actually does matter as to what happens to your brain. Because you get this cycle of addiction. So we find that when you purify and pull out sugar, it does have true addictive properties. Part of that is because you get the blood sugar goes up when you eat the sugary, sweet foods. Your insulin levels shoot up behind it, drops the sugar down low. Now your blood sugar feels low, and what do you feel? Oh, I need more sugar because I don't, I'm lightheaded. I don't feel good. I'm hungry. I'm parched, and so you go back and you get more sugar, and it creates this vicious cycle just based on insulin. Honestly, this happens just on the insulin and endocrine kind of side of it.
Yeah, and the crazy part, some reading and research that I was doing too as well, is it's not just all driven by taste. You think, okay, well, they're addicted to the taste, they're addicted, the dopamine is kind of searching. They've done studies where basically they have been able to partition individuals and shield the taste from food, which means that everything tastes the same, pretty bland, and they just eat it. Within 15 minutes of doing it, all of a sudden there is a preferential desire towards the sugary foods without the individuals having taste. And what scientists have uncovered is that there is a concept out there, these neuropods, and these neuropods inside your intestines actually can sense the sugar levels and will send through the vagal system triggers the innervations to trigger the dopamine, this desire, this drive, this craving towards those sugary foods. So why is that important? Is that when you have these foods, these sugars hidden inside of foods, these processed foods, masked by salts, masked by other things, and you're wondering, why am I craving this food? I don't even quite know why I'm craving this food. Many times it's very intentional in terms of just the right balance between salt and sugar and that fat that continues to keep you coming back for more and more. And so it becomes extremely important to really look and see about the foods and making sure the types of foods that we're eating are going to be beneficial to our body and add to our resiliency as opposed to our stress.
I think one of the things that's really frightening, as you say that, just to piggyback on what you said, is so even if you can't taste the sugar, you can still get hooked to it. That is profound because of the way it interacts with the body.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
And so Dr. Lustig is one of the premier people that speak on this, and really has been in many ways very bold and brave to speak up. But he talks about the two reasons the sugar is bad for you. One, it turns into fat in the liver. And we know that it's fat that actually blocks the insulin receptor to cause sugar not to go into the muscle cell or any other cell so that your blood sugar stays high. So sugar turns into fat and then blocks sugar. So that's the first one. But two, it messes up the mitochondria, the energy factories inside the cell. So you become insulin resistant. So two different mechanisms, 1 cup of sugar actually causes you to have problems, because when you become insulin resistant, now your body doesn't recognize insulin right. And you're not going to be able to process and get sugar out of the blood into the cells where it belongs. That kind of cacophony, along with a high fat diet, so you throw in the extra fat you take from elsewhere, actually will send up your blood sugar and lead to diabetes.
Yes, this is another representation of that whole process that you just went through, kind of looking at this, the impact of the fructose and so forth. This slide is mainly to show you guys that we actually are scientists and physicians. And so we have this here. But yeah, so you just broke it down, though. You just broke this slide down.
And so the one thing I will say, and you can speak better to this than me as a cardiologist, but a lot of times they tell you have high triglycerides. And a lot of people don't make the connection back to high triglycerides and sugar. And that's what that last slide showed you. When you go get your cholesterol checked, just remember that.
Yeah, no, that's number one. Is the first thing I speak to my patients about. So when I get the lipid profile back and I see the cholesterol level is high, that tells me whether or not your actions your words are representative of your actions. Because if I see the triglycerides high, and I'm not speaking to a familial type of genetic predisposition towards it, it tells me what your eating pattern is like. And so labs don't lie. When you start checking, they don't lie, and it's representative. So there's some concerning things that begin happening almost from the cradle to the grave, so to speak, or from the cradle that leads to the grave. And this is an interesting study that we stumbled on: is if a pregnant mother consumes excessive sugar or sweetness in any form, it can reach the unborn baby, who will then develop an even greater than usual preference for more sweetness.
And how many of us, when our mothers were pregnant, how many of us did our mothers ate sugar, or even when we were having kids, did our, in my case, did our wives have too much sugar then? So you see, it creates this cycle where the baby wants more sugar. And then one of the things we didn't put in here, but it's true, is that there have been studies that show that some of the baby formulas actually have more sugar
Yes.
than soda does.
Yes.
So then not only do they get the sugar in utero, they come out, and if they're not breastfed, and even if they are breastfed, if the mother's eating a lot of sugar, there'll be more sugar in the breast milk. But even more frightening is the formula is going to be laden with sugar. And here's the irony. So they give you that in early in life, you get the formula, and then late in life, they give you Ensure, also full of sugar. So they find a way to get the sugar in. And now you grow up drinking formula filled with sugar. Then they give you breakfast. What do you start eating when you get up? You get Cheerios, you get breakfast cereals, all full of sugar. So there's this literal pathway from the womb all the way through life where there's like a trail of sugar that keeps you addicted all the way through life. And it starts before you're even born.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. And there's more and more research that's uncovering so many different relationships between the high levels of sugar consumption, like this one looking at high sugar consumption during pregnancy, and really looking at early childhood asthma risk, right? And so something that really is impactful inside of African American communities too as well. We talk about the food deserts, food swamps, where individuals are growing up in these areas, or pregnant women are living and consuming these sugary foods and substances, and so it's problematic.
And one of one of the things that ties a lot of diseases together is insulin resistance. So we're starting to realize that insulin resistance may play a role in Alzheimer's disease, and it's caused by this sugar increase, asthma, obviously diabetes, but there are a lot of diseases that this insulin resistance is actually triggering. Even cancer is affected by this massive increase in sugar intake because of the way, as we're going to show you, sugar actually impacts the immune system.
Yes, yes. So we see this. We see obviously that sugar. Here's what's interesting too, as well as exposure to fructose makes it more likely that developing cells, right, will become fat cells. So this is
Mercy.
speaking to in utero. Just another burden of disease.
So you lay down more adipose tissue in utero because you're getting exposed to sugar, so that when you're 30 years later, when you're trying to lose weight, you have more fat cells to have to fight with to try and lose weight, and that are going to actually try and be filled. They're going to crave to be filled, and so you got set up from before you even started. So that's one good reason to really make sure we're cutting the sugar intake in our society.
That's right. That's right. So this is something that's growing, and we're seeing more and more and more of this, that sugar and mental health, and studies showing connections between the sugar consumption and the prevalence of anxiety, mood disorders, impulse control, substance abuse, and even schizophrenia. And so we speak to this awareness of mental health, but I think we need to kind of also bring awareness to the role of nutrition that it can play inside mental health.
Absolutely. One of the reasons that happens, of course, is that when you're eating these processed foods, one of the key things to mental health is actually an amino acid called tryptophan. It's a precursor to two things, serotonin and melatonin. So when you eat these high processed foods, you actually have a rush of amino acids across the blood-brain barrier, and it doesn't specify for tryptophan as well as when you eat a whole food plant-based diet. And so you don't get that pathway. And if you don't have serotonin, that dopamine is the one that motivates and makes you feel good. Serotonin is the one that makes you feel satisfied and content. And if you don't have it, you'll feel anxious. And so what is one of the number one top drug classes prescribed? Serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors. And what we're finding is that this nutritional component is being, we're trying to treat bad nutrition with these drugs, and our society will never be able to keep up doing it that way.
No, not at all. Not at all. Additional studies kind of looking at this, and this is so powerful as it relates to our teens, our youth, the future for us for tomorrow. The study was looking at 10th graders, nearly 5,500 in Norway, and found that regular consumption of sugar sweetened beverages was linked not only to hyperactivity and behavioral problems, but also mental distress and mental difficulties. And we know that many of our youth are suffering with just the strain, the stress of life from a different perspective, living life inside of social media, living life coming out of the pandemic, and so the issues of this sugar consumption is not helping. It's not helping. It's actually hurting. It's what many studies are beginning to show.
Mm.
So this is something that we see, and this is a landmark study that was published around 2014 from Journal of American Medical Association. And what researchers looked at is over the course of a 15-year study on added sugar and heart disease, the participants who took in 25% or more of their daily calories as sugar were more than twice as likely to die from heart disease as those whose diets included less than 10% added sugar. So it's not even an issue of saying you can't ever touch this stuff in your life, right? Because you may be listening and saying, "Man, this is too hard. I can't eliminate everything." This isn't even saying about eliminating everything. It's saying that if you have a significant consumption of sugar, 25% or more, which is not that hard, after describing the hidden sugars inside of your breads and meats and sauces, on top of then having desserts that we know are laden with this. And so if you're able to reduce it, you can reduce the burden and risk of dying from heart disease. So one of the things that this shows, and so I love the transition of the slides we create into this deck here. You know, we do actually know how to spell sugar and hypertension, but you know, one of the things that's interesting, you don't think about sugar causing high blood pressure. We think of salt causing high blood pressure.
Wow.
But there is growing evidence as it relates to the role of sugar in the endothelium, that special lining. You have the single cell lining that lines your vessels, which is almost like a Teflon pan. It's impenetrable and it's reactive. It allows the vessels to dilate and constrict. And so what studies are showing is not only salt, but sugar impairs it. Studies looking specifically at sugar sweetened beverages compared to water, showing that endothelium becomes disabled. And now it constricts, which can rise and lead to elevated blood pressure. So we're seeing this not only in lab studies, but we're seeing this on more epidemiologic studies of a trend and tendency towards elevated blood pressure. Sugar and diabetes, there's multiple aspects to it. So whether or not we're speaking to the increase in weight that results from a caloric standpoint, whether or not we're looking at the impact on the microbiome, which we'll speak to, or whether or not we're seeing that just there exists a relationship, right? That there is correlation as opposed to direct causation. We're seeing that they tend to go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. It's almost like umbrellas and rain. You tend to see umbrellas when it rains. As you see them out there, it's not umbrellas didn't cause the rain. Rain didn't cause the umbrellas, but we see that there's a relationship. And so we're seeing there's a distinct relationship that continues to be replicated on study after study of this relationship between sugar and the rise in sugar and the rise in diabetes.
And it's driven by insulin resistance.
Yes.
That happens because on one hand, you actually can, overwork the pancreas trying to manage all of the sugar and producing insulin to do it. But I want to go back to what we said earlier. The sugar hits the liver and actually is turned into fat. The fat goes to the muscle cell, blocks the insulin receptor. Insulin now can't open the glucose pathway into the cell, so the sugar stays in the blood. And by that, sugar itself, and there was a time people didn't think that was the case. They thought you had to just eat fat, but we now sugar actually makes the liver produce the fat that causes diabetes, and that's a scary thing.
Yes. This is the obvious one from a straight calorie standpoint of looking at the sugar and its impact in terms of obesity too as well.
Even beyond that, though, it is kind of hormonal endocrine.
Yes.
I mean, as you mess up what insulin does, that messes up how leptin is sensed in the brain. Leptin is the chemical the fat cells release to tell you you're full. So if your insulin is off because of what sugar is doing, now you can develop leptin insensitivity in the brain, just
Yes.
like you have insulin insensitivity. So you eat and you just don't feel full. You feel like you need to eat more. Sugar
Yes.
actually, this is how sugar actually amplifies the appetite, making it harder for you to actually control how much you eat.
That's right. That's right. It's almost like eating sugar begets eating more sugar. It causes you to seek out eating much more of the
Absolutely.
sugary substance foods that are there. Why don't you take this one there?
So the gut microbiome we know is very, very important, and sugar disrupts the balance. So the gut microbiome, think of it as like your lawn, and so you want good grass and good shrubs and good trees, but they're bad actors like weeds that will come in, and those will cause disease in your body. Those bacteria that really we don't want there in any significant quantity. Sugar disrupts the natural balance. It tears up the lawn. It rips up the shrubs that you want, and it allows the bad things to grow. And part of the problem that happens is that these overpopulate and actually can give you a leaky gut. They damage the lining of the gut. So that when you eat or drink too much sugar, it does this. And now toxins can pass through. So one, you get like an irritable bowel kind of sensation, which is why I think you see a rise in a lot of that stuff. And one of the reasons people say, gluten bothers me, it probably has a lot to do because they don't test positive for celiac or even gluten sensitivity, but the sugar will make it so that their gut lining doesn't do well, and some things may bother them more. You allow these toxins to go through, the toxins circulate in your body, they cross the blood-brain barrier, they cause inflammation in the brain, which affects the mood, causes brain fog, and even how people behave. Ultimately, this is most frightening because it probably is a precursor or at least increases the risk for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias.
Yes. Yeah. First, can I pause for a moment and you get the award right now because I love that analogy. I hadn't thought about that analogy before. I love that analogy of the grass. I don't know whether or not it was from you or someone else. I don't even care. But that was, if you all don't really quite get that, if you haven't battled weeds inside your lawn, inside the area, that colony that's there, that's so relatable. And that's really what we're talking about is in terms of what's going to take over. Yeah, I would tell the kids a lot of times when they were young and growing up, it's like, are you feeding the good guys or feeding the bad guys? Are you feeding the good guys or bad guys? Because that's really what we're doing on a day in and day out basis on who's going to end up winning the war.
Absolutely.
Powerful.
The immune system is one of the things that I really talk about a lot. As you all know, my medical practice is in urgent care. So I see a lot of people acutely ill. And I will literally see kids come in and their mother's like, he's been sick for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, runny nose, coughing, and he's got a Fanta orange soda in one hand. He's got a bag of hot Cheetos in another hand, and they're pulling out sugary snacks out of the backpack to give them to snack on. What happens when you eat all that sugar is it actually changes the concentration of vitamin C in the white blood cell so that the white blood cell doesn't work well. It also messes with, it also can mess with even how natural killer cells function. But 75 grams of sugar is what you get in a 24 ounce can of typical soda. It will mess up your immune system for 5 hours. Now, I want to put this in perspective. 2 things come from this. For 5 hours, you have no immune system, and then you go and you sit next to someone in a movie theater that has COVID. Let's go back 2 years and see, or you go to dinner with somebody who has COVID, or they come over your house. You have no immune system to fight COVID with. But the other side of it is if you get vaccinated against anything and your immune system isn't working right, you won't respond to the vaccination and actually develop immune protection. Here's where one of the scary parts of the story of sugar at Halloween. In the end of every October, we consume massive amounts of sugar, collectively weakening our immune systems for the entire country and much of the world, right? And then we have a flu season. I don't think it's a coincidence that we collectively destroy our immune systems all at once with a massive intake of sugar that we back up with what we do in Thanksgiving. We back up again at Christmas and even to some extent New Year's. Mm-hmm. So we have these massive, season of sweets that starts in October, end of October, and leads all the way through January. And that is when, and then bam, we get these massive flu every single year. I believe there's some bit of a cause and effect, and this is my opinion, because we overall lower our collective immunity together all at the same time. And I see this in clinic, and COVID proved this to me because we had waves of COVID in the summer when this wasn't happening. And it showed me that this cyclical way that it normally happens almost has to be, on some level, of course, related to this nutritional problem that we have of massive, massive sugar intake destroying our immune systems.
Yeah, no, that's deep. And just to add to that slightly is the fact that we see the same thing happen with the attacks and impairment on the heart and the lining of the vessels. That the body has this ability that's been instilled to heal itself, to recover. But when you add one insult on top of another insult, so you follow up, all right, the frappuccino or the milkshake for breakfast that you call a smoothie, and then you follow that up with like lunch and have something else that's sugar filled, and then you follow that up with dinner and have something else that's sugar filled, and you have snacks in between. It's no surprise that your immune system never has time to recover because of the
Absolutely. You
repetitive
get it.
insults.
Absolutely. If it goes down for 5 hours, you have sugary breakfast, and then you have a sweet stuff for snacks during the day, and then your lunch is a sandwich where the bread is full of sugar, and the ketchup is full of sugar, and the soda is full of sugar. You can see that you could easily have 10 to 12 hours where you have no properly functioning immune system. And again, in the middle of a pandemic, you could be doing that.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
It starts to make sense why we had so many people get so sick.
So I think it's time we have to wake up. We have to wake up from this nightmare of what's going on in this consumption. So there's lots of different strategies that have been promoted out there as we kind of turn the tide of the conversation just slightly on what you can do. There's some research that actually looks at sugar as cinnamon. So I know that's always been promoted, and there is some truth to it. Now, I would not say you just add cinnamon to all of your sweet stuff and say you're going to be fine, right? But if you're we know the power of spices, and they're rich in antioxidants and so forth.
Absolutely.
And so science is just kind of catching up to what we've known, whether it's cinnamon, whether it's turmeric, whether or not it's cayenne, whether or not it's different types of spices, there's benefit. And so this one shows that cinnamon can help reduce sugar cravings by controlling blood glucose levels, and it helps to minimize insulin spikes that result after an unbalanced meal. So we want to make sure that we incorporate this. Do I add cinnamon? I do. I have cinnamon inside my shelf. I have nutmeg. I try and keep all the spices there.
I add it to a lot of my teas. If I make peppermint tea, I put a cinnamon stick just like that in it because I know it's just a way to make peppermint even more healthy. I actually honestly didn't know about this maybe blunting the spike in sugars and even the craving for sugar. So may need to make sure I put an extra stick of cinnamon in there.
That's right. As well as the lemon and lime inside your water. So not only we know the power from vitamin C that you're given in terms of it and help fight, even historically scurvy and some other aspects there, but it's been shown to help fluctuations in blood sugar levels by reducing the food's overall glycemic index. And this is from the acid. So whether or not it's in part the taste that drives down some of the cravings and so forth for the taste, because you have the sour taste on your tongue, or whether or not it's another mechanism inside the intestines too as well through the microbiome. But we find that there is some benefit to this as well. So you may want to try that. Add some lemon to your water too as well.
I definitely will do that.
Then fiber, it's always important. So I mean, that's a great duping of industry, right? Is like we said already, is to take out the fiber, take out the water so it can stay packaged. That fiber is the key. Having fiber rich in your foods. It's not that the fruit is bad. Have the fruit itself, the whole fruit. Get rid of the fruit juice. Have the fruit itself. Have the fiber associated with these things, and it can help offset the spikes in the blood sugar there completely.
Yeah, definitely get rid of the fruit flavoring.
Growing
up, they had like watermelon Kool-Aid, and not a drop of watermelon in that
Kool-Aid. Not even a little bit.
Orange soda, a drop of orange in it. And so you definitely want the fiber. If America has a nutritional deficiency, it's fiber.
Absolutely.
That's a crazy thing. And once you recognize that, you say, let me look for fiber in every meal, every restaurant I go to. If they have quinoa, if they have whole brown rice, you want to ask for the foods that have that in it, because that naturally will turn your health by going after the whole grains, the fiber-rich foods. Automatically, it'll make you healthier.
Yeah, for sure. One of the examples I would always give inside the lectures is I would talk about, if it's my anniversary and I need to give my wife a gift, if I pulled out my wallet and gave her a $20 bill, how many people think she would be happy with me? Nah, they're not gonna be happy with me. She's not gonna happy with me, right? But if I brought out a box that was beautifully wrapped, and all of a sudden her mind gets going, she starts wondering, what did he get me? Did he get me keys to a new car? Did he get me keys to a summer house? What did he get me? As she starts to unravel and unwrap that box, she's having to work for the gift that's inside. And so that's the same thing with the body. If you throw the body just refined processed sugar, well, Dr. Walsh already went through the vicious loop that begins happening, right? The insulin shoots up, it stores it, you get the crash, you get the hunger. But when the body has to work for that sugar, has to unravel and unpeel the fiber, you have a more sustained release. You don't have the spikes and valleys that begin to occur, which means your blood sugar remains controlled. So we want to make sure that we incorporate fiber on a regular basis. And this is one of the keys to overcoming, waking up out of this sugar debacle we're in.
And if you're giving out stuff at Halloween from your house, try and give them kids some stuff with some fiber in it. I don't know if it'll work nowadays, but try to.
That's right. That's right. So, what are some keys as we kind of end this session here? I think one, put down the soda, put down the fruit juice, try and get water, flavor your water if you need to, add in some lemon, like we talked about, add in some, infuse it with some other fruits or vegetables there and get some benefit. If you just have to have that soda taste, then, look at some sparkling water and do the same sort of thing. But you want to stay away from the high sugar and especially the high fructose corn syrup that's there.
That's right.
Want to look at the fruit, right? So try and substitute that. That's a good one. That's a real good
one. Fruit is one of the main ones. If you need something sweet, I just bought some apples at Whole Foods, and man, I bite into one of the things. It's like biting a candy. It's so sweet, so delicious. So it's full of water, because one of the things you want these foods to be water rich, hydrates you, and goes through you faster because of it. So eating fruit is important. As a matter of fact, there's studies that show if we got everyone around the world to eat like 5 or I forget how many pieces of fruit more a day, how the overall burden of disease on the whole planet would come down. And it's a natural sweet thing that you can do that is actually quite healthy.
Well, I'm gonna make it even practical because I grew up working inside of an ice cream shop. I'm not gonna throw out names out there, but I grew up in high school and that's one of the things that's my sugar addiction, right? So how did I overcome it? Part of it were fruit smoothies. And so things like banana and ice cream, just frozen bananas, a little bit of almond milk or nut-based milk that's there. You can throw some cherries in there and you have a cherry Garcia almost. And so these are things that you can have that are reasonable substitutes that can still give you somewhat of that flavor that's there without eliminating the fiber or the nutrients that are there.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Read the labels. Remember, 4 grams equals 1 teaspoon. So don't be fooled. Don't be duped. And look at the serving size. So if 1 serving equals 12 grams, that's 3 teaspoons per serving, whether that's your instant oatmeal or anything else.
So you eat 4 of them, you got to multiply that by 4.
That's right.
And that tells you how quickly we consume lots of sugar, because there's drinks that a serving is a third of the drink and you don't realize it. And in that third of a drink is literally the equivalent of 4 or 5 teaspoons. So you drink the whole thing and you just drank 20 teaspoons of sugar, which is astronomical. And you look at some of the big energy drinks, some of them are hyper loaded with sugar and caffeine at the same time. So you be very careful and make sure you read the labels as has been said.
Yeah. Last one, we were just talking about this before we went on for this broadcast, is really about how we substitute sugars. And Eric, you brought up one of the things that you do in terms of with dates, and that's really what you want to figure out is how can I get natural sweeteners? But go ahead with
so people always what people naturally ask us is, well, what sugar should I do? So they want to know, should I use agave? Should I use honey? Should I use molasses? Now, what I can tell you is that molasses, honey, they're still just sugar. That's exactly what they're going to break down to in your body. Now, they do have more minerals and vitamins based on just who they kind of are. They're less processed, but it is still going to be sugar. In some ways, honey can actually be worse depending on the situation. But when people ask what sugar should I use, the only good answer, or I should say the best answer, is like date sugar, which is just ground up dates. And people say, well, it's not sweet enough. And my response is sweetness is an acquired taste. If you come off of it, your need for it will actually come down. And now, like if I eat something that's really sweet, I'm like, oh, that's too sweet. Or if I drink something, oh, that's too sweet. Because you could naturally turn it down. When I was a kid and we were drinking Kool-Aid, which is basically colored sugar, and then add sugar to the Kool-Aid. I mean, your tolerance for sweets was so high, something had to be super sweet for you to think it was sweet at all. So you can substitute out date sugar if you have to. But I tell people the main thing is to really retrain the palate so we don't need so much sweets, because that's what has hijacked all of us. That we've been trained to need the food to be super sweet. We would take growing up, we'd take like brown beans, the vegetarian beans, which are already have sugar in them, already sweet. And my brother and I would add sugar to that to make the beans sweeter for us to eat. And once you stop doing that, you actually become fine with the regular beans without all the added sugar.
That's right. That's right. It's good stuff. So this is the scary truth about sugar, and some means and ways in which we can kind of combat this is what we wanted to end this session on with you. And so, it's been a pleasure as always, kind of spending time with you all and kind of sharing in this season, right? So we want you not only to be consumers, but we want you to kind of actually go ahead and enact the changes that are meant to be had with this. But last thoughts that you have.
My last thought, I mean, if you're going to do anything on the 31st, be safe first and foremost. I'll be in my house safe. Right. But just think about this and think about when we're giving kids all this candy, what are we really doing to them? I mean, we didn't get deep into what it does to the brain, but think about it. I mean, giving a kid all this stuff that the science is showing it can cause hyperactivity, brain fog, messes with their immune system. Are we really doing the best thing for our kids by giving them what they want? And you've heard us say it before, your body will conspire to kill you. Yes. You just give yourself everything you want. You'll eat ice cream, you'll drink yourself into trouble. So you've got to have some brakes on it. It's not easy. So, start with a really intentional way to taper down. Dr. Batiste said it already. One of the best places to start is to remove liquid sugar. Get away from the sugary drinks, and then look at the foods and begin to back away from sugar.
Yeah. Be safe out there, and right now we have coming up next. So thanks for spending your time. If you have questions, hit us up on the inbox. Be sure to like this on YouTube. Send your friends, your family over to YouTube, Slave Food Project, and like and follow the channel there, as we're going to put out more and more information as it relates to different aspects to our health, right? Involving stress, discrimination, and overcoming this through nutritional resiliency. We have coming up a special heading up into November 11th. Be with us. We're going to have a special guest talking about prostate cancer for Men's Health Month. So a group, and so we're looking forward to that conversation that we're going to have at that time. And so we hope you'll join us then, and we'll see you soon.